Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Blue Grit Radio. This is Eric, and I'm joined today by Marlon Marrache. Marrache. I'm just going to say it a couple different ways. Marrache, because you got the double R's.
That is true. You actually said it perfect there, Eric. It's Marrache, but you're right. People chop it up. And, now that I'm in my golden years and just turned 55 in January. So, yeah, no problem as to how you say the last name. But thank you for having me.
You look great. You don't look like you're in your mid-50s. You look like you could hit the streets for another, maybe 10, 15. And I know that anyone would take you with a bonus. So let's go.
You know what? I'll go out to where you're at and we'll push the sled, brother. I have no problem with that.
Yeah, man. I'm going to need you to show me. Well, thanks for hopping on, man. Your claim to fame is you're the IA dude. But before I just drop that and people turn right off, no. I think when people hear IA and they're of a professional culture, they're like, okay, here we go. But let's think about the national landscape. And let's also think about what IAs do as far as clearing wrongful allegations. And so the whole gamut. And so that's not the only thing I want to have you on to talk about, but for sure that is your forte. I was reviewing and I was looking at your LinkedIn, and it actually, I don't know if you intended to write it this way, but are you an Office fan? Yeah, the show, because you have assistant to the chief in one of your command gigs.
Oh yeah, dude. That thing just cracks me up left and right.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, life is. Look, what we go through in this career, humor is definitely the best remedy, the way I see it.
Yeah. So, assistant to the chief when you were serving as an LT, but yeah, give us a little crash course about your coming into law enforcement, where that came from, and then your different assignments and where your career went.
Well, thank you. Let's see. Back in the mid '90s, I was in the Navy and I did not want to reenlist. And my best friend, who just it's one of those things where what's that saying? Monkey see, monkey do, right? Your friends influence you a lot of what you do and what you don't do in some cases.
Yeah, good, bad, ugly, yeah.
You know how that goes, exactly. And so what ends up happening is he decides to tell me when he was 25, 26 years old, hey, bro, you know what? I always wanted to be a cop. And sure enough, he applied for the LAPD, and I did not want to reenlist. He started telling me how awesome this job is. He was in the academy. Academy life kind of sucks, but you're excited,
Yeah.
And so he told me, you got to do this, you got to try it. And so I was a little hesitant. I think for me, believe it or not, I was really concerned about, God, do I really want to carry a gun? And do I really want to get into this shooting? And next thing you know, that suspect has a wallet or an object. And here I am, I got to live that for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring that up because back in those days, the Diallo shooting out of the state of New York happened. And it was controversial, 40 shots. Yeah. You remember that shooting where the kid walked up in front of his apartment building and this cops just 40 rounds and they blasted the kid and, became a very controversial incident. However, once I applied, brother, you know what? All those concerns, fears, and nervousness became motivation. I was pumped. And lo and behold, I finished my time in the Navy. And July of 1998, I get a notification saying, congratulations, you're in the Los Angeles Police Academy. And here we are 25 years later. I retired in July of 2022. So we're coming up on 2 years.
Yeah. Congrats.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And it's been quite a ride. I've had so many good assignments, and LAPD has afforded me so much success to the point where I promised myself that I will give back to the law enforcement community and teach and guide and provide the next generation what it is to be a police officer today
Yeah.
compared to what it was 25 years ago. So, yeah, man, that's a
Yeah.
trip down memory lane for me. And you did mention Cal State University in Dominguez Hills. I was second to command to the chief, basically an assistant chief
Yeah.
at Campus University Policing. I did that for 1 year, and in November, I resigned, and I wanted to do way more that I believe was a calling than to be back in operations and providing that leadership.
Yeah.
It was a tough decision, but more important than anything was, hey, Marlon, how passionate are you to provide your expertise to others? And we'll get into the internal affairs component because you're right. People look at IA or they hear the word IA and they're like, oh, these guys are the dark side, the rat squad, you name it. And for me, it's always been like, okay, there's this stigma that's been in existence for decades. What can we do to kind of get away from that stigma? And so that's been a calling for me. It's been a tall order. However, I've been teaching ever since last March of 2023 for Savage Training Group, an internal affairs course, a 2-day course. So within that and the fact that I actually wanted to start a police podcast, and I called it exactly what it is. It's internal affairs. And believe it, some people actually get a hold of me and they go, I just can't believe you actually have it. Have the name internal affairs. Well, you know what? Clarity wins. Simplicity is what it is.
Yeah. It is what it is. Yeah.
Exactly, man. And you know what? I've been blessed. It's just taken off. And that's it, brother. It's life is good, and here we are having all these conversations and all these police platforms, which I feel are super super important for us to have. And I'll be the first one to tell you that there will never be enough platforms for us to talk about how law enforcement is so important in terms of transparency.
Yeah, man, I love that. That's such a good crash course. And I like how you flipped it, right? Because there is a perception, I started with it, right? Internal affairs. But if you think about it, like the only thing we have to be worried about is when you have crooked cops. If you have like malfeasance and wrongdoing and malintent and all these things. And it makes me think of like LA Confidential and like the old school like movies where you're like, okay, there's like the rat squad, right? And then the everyone else because it's so necessary. And I think that so many cops today would look at movies like that and it's frustrating. Like it's a cool movie to watch, but you see cops even in eras prior where you're like, okay, you guys were the start of ruining it for us, or you see something in the national headlines, you're like, cool, you're why we can't have nice things, this and that, right? But the majority, the extreme majority, we know in the trade, in the job, are doing it all with the right reasons, the right intents. We mess up a little bit, right? We have our human moments, but our conviction and our character is there, right? So I think that in light of that, right, internal affairs is very much the opportunity to keep things as professional and dialed in as possible, which is what we want, which is what the public wants. Like it's a win-win.
100%, brother. Look, I always try to remind, especially in my podcast, and whenever I get a chance to speak about this, is that if we look at it from a global perspective, you have to understand that there's 18,000 agencies. I want to say about north or close to 18,000 agencies in the
Yeah.
United States, right? And so don't quote me on this, but I would imagine there's got to be probably north of 800,000 police officers right now in the nation. And so when we start talking about misconduct and discipline, it sticks out because it's just like, wow, there is some
Mm-hmm.
bad apples, like you said, there is malfeasance. But what we have to remind ourselves is that it's a very, very small fraction than what we're dealing with. However, it's important for others to know because it's going to happen. The way I see it is, IA, as bad as it is, it's needed. Each one of my guests, I get to ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, right? 10 being the highest, how important is internal affairs to you in a police department? And a lot of these experts, these people with experience, go out and some just say 10 right away and they explain why.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I'm a little biased because I am an IA alum. However, the way I see it is, look, if you're doing patrol operations, if you're in an administrative capacity, a tactical application, or just out there providing service to the community, something's going to happen, or someone's going to have a perception of, hey, Eric, yeah, you know what? he did something that I feel was wrong. And so you need that IA component to ensure that my motto has always been no stone goes unturned. And
Yeah.
of course, we'll get into that, but it takes a special, I should say it, the more I think about it, it takes a special person, to
Yeah.
really be, know that, hey, if Eric is being accused of alleged misconduct, I'm going to do everything that I can, right? Every possible evidence that I can gather to ensure that he's been exonerated, because I'm going to be blown away and shocked that Eric actually did what this complainant is alleging, that, whatever that misconduct might be. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, and that's crucial. And so, like, different departments handle, whether they have a dedicated IA unit, whether they're big enough. Like, someone's doing that role, someone's doing that job, and then different levels of complaints go different ways. But even as a new patrol sergeant, I remember when people would complain about some of my guys, or maybe it's not my direct assigned officer, but it's a different officer, and I know that officer's character, and I know that person's, you know, their reputation, right? I know like the type of work they bring in and who they are. Like I know them personally. And so sometimes you get these heinous complaints and it just made me want to just kind of blow it off, right? I'm like, "Hey, like this is just BS," right? But in hindsight, and it didn't take me long to recognize like I could tell the officer, "Hey, you're being investigated at this thing. This is the complaint. This is the nature. We have the conversation." And then body cams are fantastic, right? Because I'd be able to watch it, itemize the things. It's like writing a really good police report for a supervisor where you write or you document or you record all the person's allegations. And then to circle back and literally like have these line items where like, "Hey, I looked at this, what you relayed is not what I saw. Here's what I saw." And a lot of times, like people didn't want to come and look at the video.
Mhm.
They kind of say, "Hey, my truth is my truth." A lot of times, they actually said, "I remembered it differently. Thanks for ironing that all out." But at the end of the day, because I gave the time of day, because I took the time for all parties related, like everyone had a better perception from that engagement if you do it the right way. And that's just my very like surface level explanation of a little thing, right? So, no, I'm excited to get jumping into this. I do want to ask, what if I were to tell, 2-year street vet Marlon, Officer Marlon, "Hey, fast forward in your career, you're gonna be supervising internal affairs as a sergeant." What would he say to me?
I would say me as a supervisor telling you a 2-year officer,
No, me telling you at 2 years, "Hey man, this is where your career's going. You're gonna be the IA dude."
I would tell you what you said earlier. Don't have expectations,
Mm,
and don't be so quick to have that pre notion or bias that there's just no way Eric did something like that. Or, oh, I don't like Eric. Yeah, I can see him doing that.
mm,
You see what I'm saying? So
yeah,
when you do the intake and you're listening to, that's even if you decide to even do an intake, because you'd be surprised. What I would tell you is know your definition of misconduct. That's one. And know your rights. Know your peace officer's bill of rights if you have one in your state. Because if you
yeah,
don't, then you really need to be forthcoming and have that integrity to tell your boss, hey, listen, I know this person was complaining, but I'm not going to cut a face sheet. I'm not going to do an intake because it didn't meet the criteria of alleged misconduct, and here are the reasons why. So that's the first thing I would tell you is you got to know what you're getting yourself into. And part of that is your rights. And more than anything is just don't have any expectations, man, because whatever you hear, and which, by the way, we'll get a little bit more into the weeds of an intake, is you want to lock someone into a statement right away. Don't be lazy. You got to be really, really serious and focused about this kind of function.
yeah. You
Meaning,
talking about the complainant, or you talking about the officer with the allegation?
well, the officer and the allegation, what I would tell, well, let's go with the officer first. The
Sure.
first thing you need to do is, and this is very, very important because when I teach a Savage training group and we do these classes, we do have a lot of small agencies. And what I convey to the audience, to the students, is that in a small agency, you need to be forthcoming and let that officer know, hey, listen, man, someone came in the station today and said that while you guys were doing a traffic stop, you pretty much took the occupant out of the car and threw him up against the wall. All right, boom, done. That is your duty and the respect that you have for your officer. And of course, he or she is going to be like, oh my God, what are you talking? And then you have to just kind of like, you know what, we're done. We can't talk about this anymore. We're going to have a formality about this. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to get an email. It's going to get assigned to an internal affairs investigator or an investigator here, a sergeant. And just wait, get yourself some representation, but know that it's going to be completely investigated. That's what I would say. The
Yeah.
problem is that the culture, and we talk about culture a lot, is we don't do that. We seem to distance ourselves from that accused employee.
Mm.
We seem to act and start whispering and having these rumors like, oh my God, can you believe that's what Eric did? Or Marlon, let me tell you what happened to traffic stop. And then these rumors just start going around. And next thing you know, the entire department knows that Eric, and it gets twisted
Mm.
so many ways to the point where they said that you just body slammed and like pretty much committed serious misconduct. And that's just not the right way to go about things. Now, in a big agency, if you're listening out there, it's not that difficult to get away from all the rumors because in a huge agency of 1,000, 4,000, even 500 plus for that matter, it tends to just kind of, okay, it goes away. You don't have to tell them right away. Somehow, some way they'll find out. But me personally, you have to be forthcoming, knowing that you're not going to violate anybody's rights by you just informing them. Someone came in the station today to make a complaint against you, and this is what the allegations are. Don't get into details about the
Yeah.
allegation
Yeah.
and just let it be.
I love that. And I love how earlier you said, hey, know the Bill of Rights, know the officer's rights. And even in this explanation, you're removing a lot of the stigma by just saying it as it is, right? Like, don't overthink it. Just say, hey, we received this complaint. This is what it said. No, yeah, I'm going to stop you. Don't say anything. Like, I think that that's huge, right? You recognize that every officer has rights, and whether they have a union or whether they have, whether they're a right to work state, and we can get into that later because I am kind of curious your perspectives on that. But yeah, it is helpful to the officer if we know process. And I'm just going to inject this thing right for agency leaders and union representatives. What better way to get across that before and proactively if you just say, hey, it's been about a year since we talked about it. Just so you know, if you have a complaint, this is the process, right? Sarge will reach out, tell you you have this complaint. You can hit me up. You don't have to right away. Maybe once we actually address or provide answer, then, hit me up or the attorney or what have you, right? If everyone's on the same page, then we can make sure we're sticking to the process. We're doing it cleanly and in a regimented fashion. I think that protects everyone, right?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest challenges we've had throughout the decades is that we work in silos. We really, really do.
Mm-hmm.
Take it a step further. Not only should you just let them know that, hey, there's some alleged misconduct being alleged against you, you should also walk them through the whole process, bro. Look, if you're a
Yeah.
small agency, you're going to know. Hey, Eric, in about 2 weeks, the investigator is going to turn in the investigation for the next level review to analyze and review it. Hey, Eric, you know what? In about 2 weeks, it's going to be presented to the chief, and there's going to be an outcome. So I'll let you know. Or while you're waiting for that, hey, Eric, how you doing, man? You need anything?
Yeah, that's good.
Concerns, and stuff like that. Talk about mental wellness. That's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Yeah.
and I both know that there is research now and enough empirical data, if you will, right? What is that fancy word? The meta-analysis. Look at me.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
good.
So,
You
so
got your glasses on. The listeners won't know, but you got some fancy glasses on it, which make you look super credible.
yes, evidence-based practices and the
Mm.
meta-analysis shows that mental wellness also is when you are facing discipline. The emotions that you go through and how it affects your behavior at home, your behavior at work, takes a toll on you. And you and I both, we didn't know this 20 plus years ago. And so
Mm-hmm.
my point is that if you're going to walk through those darkest moments, because sometimes they are, and guess what? Sometimes it is serious misconduct. And sometimes when you're
Yeah.
investigating this, maybe you are facing termination. And you know what? That still shouldn't stop you from saying, look, man, we're going to get through this together. And there's some accountability in your part, and just let it fall, where it needs to be. And if that's losing your career, then so be it. But hey, I'm here for you. if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I love that. And there is such a wellness component, right? It's wellness to the individual, which most people can recognize. Like, hey, getting this bomb dropped, hey, you're getting sued, or hey, you're getting IA'd. Like, that's super stressful. And we talk about wellness and the ability to just function in your workplace effectively. I mean, psychological safety is a thing. And I've been in peer support long enough to know, well, one, if I got called into one of these complaints or issues, right, that's like super jarring. But then also on the peer support aspect, like, I don't know how many officers I've talked to through the years in various points of scrutiny, if you want to call it that, where they are afraid to do their job, even though they're great at
Yep.
their job, right? They're afraid to mess up. They will verbalize that they keep stepping on themselves and they get in their head. It's just like watching like a new rookie cop on FTO, right? That makes one mistake and you trying to say, hey, yeah, cool, you made the mistake, move past it. But they can't because it's looming and it is this process that has discipline, suspension, up to termination, right? That's looming over their heads. So yeah, that's of huge importance that you highlight that, and then also you could expound that out to be like the agency level, like agency wellness. And if you don't have a clean cut process and people don't know what to expect, if they're not told what to expect, just like you've outlined, then everyone's kind of in this state of limbo, uncertainty, and you know how that pans out, right? We've been facing it nationally for the last few years. So yeah, no man, keep going and the next points you got.
Yeah, and the other thing also to add into that, Eric, is that I honestly feel like we're doing a disservice to the young cops and to
Mm,
the recruits, right? To people who are in the academy. Because I don't know about you, but I know when I was in the academy, no one told me anything about misconduct. No one told me how this whole disciplinary process works. And by the way, a big machine like the LAPD, I mean, you're talking 10,000 plus at the time. Now we're probably at 8,000. But there are officers that will go through the entire career and not see discipline or even know about the whole process in the system. But that shouldn't stop you from walking into an academy class or your orientation when you first get to, to the precinct or division, and maybe have an hour block to explain to them, look, let me tell you what alleged misconduct is, right? Let's all define it to ensure we're all on the same page. And let me explain to you what the process is. That way you have an idea, uh, you know, as you move forward in your career, and not be shocked when you're getting an email saying, hey, you are being accused of such and such, and you need to set up an appointment and get yourself a union rep to do the IA.
yeah. Yeah. What since you do so much training and you interact with so many agencies of varying shapes, sizes, demographics, locations, like what are some common trends that you see or common opportunities for growth, in these agencies when you look at their practice and what they take away from your training?
So, a couple of things. In terms of practices, I should say best practices, is
Yeah.
having policy as it relates to procedures of
Mm,
the internal affairs complaint process, meaning demonstrably false. That's a perfect one. We talked about earlier when someone decides to make a complaint against you, you review body worn video and you just like it's not it's not depicted as you explained it, Mr. Johnson, and so you want to be able to adjudicate that demonstrably false. What I've seen as a trend, especially with small agencies, is that there is no true definition or a policy in that department of a demonstrably false definition. In other words, what's your criteria that meets a demonstrably false adjudication? So that'll be
mm,
one. The other is the huge one. And luckily, my beloved LAPD actually has a definition of a false or a misleading statement. Culture will say that it's false and misleading. Everybody always says it's false and misleading. There's no such thing. It's either a false statement or
mm,
it's either a misleading statement. And you should have, as an agency, a definition. What is a false statement? We totally understand that the standard of proof is preponderance, right? More likely than not. So it's like about 51%. However, when you start talking about a false statement, also known as dishonesty, or you start talking about a misleading statement, you as an adjudicator should really crank that 51% all the way up to like 90. Because if you're going to find a classification of sustain, or if you're going to say that this person's guilty of a false statement, you are talking about termination. You really have no choice, somewhat. I would say probably 98.5% 5% that you're going to be terminating in the penalty phase, or someone's going to have to make a decision that, look, it's sustained for a false statement. We can't have liars. You got to go, and I got to fire you.
Yeah,
And
you lie, you
so
die, right?
you lie, you die. Exactly. So what you need to understand is that those two particular types of definitions that you should have in your manual, in your department, is really, really critical. And we've come to find out here at Savage Training Group that not many agencies have that. So we teach that a lot. And a lot of the sergeants, and by the way, the classes are filled with new sergeants or sergeants that are getting ready to be assigned to internal affairs, along with some lieutenants, and sometimes we get command staff. But when
Mm-hmm.
I bring up, hey, you guys have a policy for demonstrably false, and everybody looks at some, that's been maybe one or two, but not many. And then I do an exercise with a false statement or a misleading statement. And that's also important, especially when you start talking about dishonesty. You don't want to have, and unfortunately, and you know this too, Eric, is as it moves up the levels of review, and as much as I hate to say this, but at some point it gets personal. It's, it becomes a little self-serving, and it completely just ignores the entire process. Even if you fall on the sword and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'm taking some accountability. But someone in those levels of review, it doesn't happen quite often, but it does become a little personal. It becomes self-serving, and that's not what we want, which is another reason why it motivates me to do all this. And it's just unfortunate, but that's just part of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, when you say that, it makes me think of like these stories of yesteryear, and I think everyone can relate to that, regardless of what agency you hired at. But you hear these stories of like something that happened back in the day, and you're like, what process was there or wasn't there, right? And
Yeah,
but it makes me think of that when you say like, hey, self-serving, and sometimes it was regarded self-serving to kind of sweep it under the rug, right? Because we don't want that scrutiny, we don't want the press, we don't, and like that is literally I mean, we again going back, and if anyone's listening, like when we started, we're talking about we are human, we make mistakes,
yes,
but the public expects something of us, we expect something of each other, and so we got to be dialed in. Like this is where the professionalism comes in. And I think it is common, maybe you know better, but it is more and more common that you have essentially IA as a component of like a professional standards division or unit, because
bureau.
they're absolutely integrated with policy and practice, SOP, right? All the standards that we want to put out.
Absolutely. Another example on the other side of the coin would be just internally. Your last guest, John Kelly, who I had on my podcast as well, is a perfect example. Here you have a stellar individual who has a great reputation as a sergeant. I believe he was a training coordinator. He was in training, and everybody knew him, and they just went after him. They went after him and nine other of his colleagues,
Hmm.
and they just would not stop pulling that chain. Like, we just got to get these guys. And what really stood out in our conversation is no one ever bothered to ask him why. Like, why is he going on a downward spiral? That's where that empathy piece comes in, because sometimes we just don't even want to do that, because maybe, like you said, we're dealing with the human element. And so it becomes personal, like, you know what, we got him. I don't like John. So, which is kind of weird because he's hard not to like. He's such a good dude.
Yeah, 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 for sure. No, I felt the same. He's super charismatic, nice dude, and so you're like, man, what's wrong with the guy that doesn't like him?
Exactly.
So when you look at IAs and your experience from working in the field, I think that that would be a common response if someone like in your training, new sergeant, hey, you're going to IA. Is there generally this like kind of dismal attitude of like, man, no one's going to want to be friends with me anymore, and like I'm just not going to gel with the culture? Like, was there that for you? And then is that something that you see amongst the people you train, and like how do you combat that?
Yeah. Well, for me, lucky me, in a big agency, like no one really, besides my classmates making fun of me, oh, you're going to go to IA. But I've never really had any type of enemies. I mean, I've had some hard cases. Here in the LAPD, we have a border rights process for their hearings. They're like mini civil trials when you're facing serious termination. So, in other words, the chief of police pretty much directs you, Marlon, you're going to be facing some serious misconduct. I'm directing you to this hearing, and I'm recommending removal. I'm recommending termination, but your fate lies on those 3 panel members in this hearing. And so we go through a full civil trial. So, yeah, not many people know about that process, but you tend to, when I start calling in the witnesses of this particular incident and saying, hey, you're going to have to testify, and pretty much telling what happened, and right across from you is your partner who's sitting there facing termination. Yeah, you're not very well liked. All I can say is that we're not really in the, whether you're liked or not, in the beginning, just take it with a grain of salt, because you're going to be doing some good work if you're asking all the questions, if you're exhausting all your avenues of your leads and leaving every single stone unturned. That's that motto, right? No stone goes unturned. If you're
Mm.
doing all that, whether someone in the beginning doesn't want to talk to you anymore or doesn't want to hang out with you anymore, they're going to start getting to know Eric or Marlon and say, you know what, this dude's asking all. Hey man, he's asking all these questions and he's exhausting all this effort and time into this particular bullshit chicken shit type of allegations that, you know what, it's going to come back exonerated or maybe unfounded. So sooner or later, and guess what? In a small agency, that sticks out a lot, way more than a bigger agency.
Oh yeah, I could see
So
that.
yeah, I mean, me personally, I was never really. No one ever really said, "Oh, dude, you're working IA." I was a little social butterfly at work, and people love Marlon. I was a sweetheart, man. Even up there when you're facing termination, which was very difficult for me in terms of my emotions, bro. I gotta be honest with you. In those 4+ years that I was there, it was super difficult for me because you're seeing officers just lose it all, and
Mm.
I have good energy. I love to laugh, and smile, and be very charismatic about these and enthusiastic about everything. And it's just dark and cold and silent and just serious. And, for me, it was quite an experience emotionally. So,
Yeah,
yeah, for
what
the young
helped you with
sergeant,
that?
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
what helped you with that? I want to ask because, I didn't know you when you're in the service, right? But
Yeah.
you're retired now, so maybe there's a glow to you because that sometimes happens with folks. But also, all jokes aside,
Yes.
you're engaged and you're lively, which I think is something that we need to champion and model for retired cops because we know the trends, right? We know people retire and then they kind of just fade out and they
Yes.
actually, expire quickly, right? Because they lose purpose. So like good
Yes.
on you for modeling that like life after LE, but not to go too much on that tangent, but
Yep.
when you recognize like, hey, you're a people person, you're a social butterfly, you're a feeler, and then you are watching these mistakes unfortunately pan out to that negative space, right, where someone's career is forfeit essentially. Like, what helped you kind of navigate that personally, or did you have any kind of trials with your own personal wellness while doing that role?
Very, very good question. About the way that I can answer that is I was super engaged with a lot off duty. I was a single dad and working a lot of overtime. But more than anything, I was in law school.
Mm,
So for me, it was like it's 4 o'clock and I got to get on the freeway and study all my cases and briefings ready for for school. It's almost as if I never really had time to kind of unwind, right,
mm,
and decompress, if you will, to know how to deal with all that. But yeah, man, it was very silent for me. Look, as long as I keep playing soccer and as long as I keep working out, and soccer's my thing, man. I'm a sports junkie in terms of watching it out.
yeah,
Dan Patrick at 6 in the morning. I love ESPN. I watch everything that there is except hockey. I just can't get into hockey, but I watch everything there is to know. I like to think of myself as a D1 All American when it comes to let's see, yeah, I'd like to be the Georgia or the Final Four,
mm, yeah,
FCS type of IA guy. And for me, that was my coping mechanism. It's just coming home to my daughter, working out, playing soccer. But more than anything, during those particular moments, I never had the time to really just kind of think about. I remember my first termination case where we're at closing arguments and the attorney asked the accused employee to get up and say some closing words and beg for forgiveness, and he just started crying and got all emotional, and it broke me, bro.
Mm,
To the point where I come up to the attorney and say, "Hey, man, can I at least come up to him and hug him or say, hey, man, it's going to be all right?" He goes, "No, don't even come close to him because you're
mm.
like the enemy right now."
Ah, man.
And so for me, yeah, there was a lot of division and conflict as it relates to going through this process. So yeah, man, it was tough. I want to say probably next to working the abuse child unit, which I will never do. Anything that involves child abuse investigations, absent that particular assignment, in my opinion, as far as I'm concerned, the job of a sergeant representing the chief of police in a border rights hearing as an advocate in internal affairs is super difficult. And guess what, man? Not many people want to do it. And
Yeah.
I can attest to this, is not many people want to do IAs. Not many people like to do traffic collision reports, no any different than a lot of people don't like to do IAs. And even if you're asked to do this assignment, you know what? Do some self reflection and go home and talk to your family and talk to your friends. Call me, and I'll tell you what to expect, or, or you, whoever. But guess what, man? It might not be for you. And if you have to walk in and tell your lieutenant or your captain and say, you know what? I appreciate the offer, but this is something that I don't want to do.
Yeah, that's really healthy in reflection. And I've said the same thing. I have the utmost respect for people that go after child predators. And after, years of being around kid calls and at a patrol level, even, and being like, I wanted to be a dad at some point, and I was like, I don't know if I could do this. And then after having a daughter, I'm like, yeah, no thanks. Like, there's very few things I would go to my boss and say, hey, like, I'm not that guy. I'm like, I want to be a team player, but that is the one. And so even more hats off, right, to the people that do that very righteous work. But I think there's something to pack in what you said, and I think that there is a value to compartmentalizing, as you kind of did, right? You just were a busy dude, and I think that a lot of first responders can reflect on that. But what I like about it is you're busy doing a lot of really healthy coping mechanisms, right? You call them coping mechanisms, and usually that has a negative connotation in this work
Correct.
because it's drinking and all that, and like kind of being alone. But like, hey, working out was like a thing you got to do, and watching sports was a thing you got to do, and a lot of people watch sports in the social, right? If you're hanging out with your kids, and like these are things that it sounds like you were so busy with law school, like you didn't have time to dwell. And while that's generally not sustainable from a lot of people's anecdote and a lot of clinicians, like it sounds like you made it through that chapter, as far as building in these healthy mechanisms that were kind of non-negotiables, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Playing for the department soccer team and being with my teammates was such a good coping mechanism for me.
Mm,
Traveling and going to tournaments and being together, that to me has always been, even in the Navy. I've always been. My dad's a retired admiral from the Peruvian Navy. I was born and raised in Peru, and
mm,
I'm just a team guy. And you'll know this. There's some people who just don't really like to participate and be in a team environment. I could never be a tennis player, or I surfed a lot, and surfing was very oh gosh, it was very therapeutic. But here I am alone, just me, my board in the ocean, and you're out there with some dudes, but hanging out. But again, still, it just didn't really rise to the level of me being part of a team and accomplishing something together.
yeah.
And as an advocate, putting on these border rights hearings for terminations cases, it was just me, and yeah, it's a tough it's a it's a hill that you have to climb, and some people like climbing hills with partners to accomplish it all together, and some don't. I was one of those that needed to have a partner.
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense when you talk about that isolating nature of the job, and I think that it's a increasing recognition, like I've talked about on this podcast with Chris Luttrell. But it gets lonelier the higher you go in rank, and IA is kind of this interesting thing where a big department, yeah, you could be a sergeant, right, and all of a sudden you're kind of isolated, and then you're at a hearing like this, and you're definitely outwardly isolated, and so yeah, I think that recognizing at the end of the day, we're all people. We want to be on the same team. Like that can be something crucial, right? So if you got a buddy or even like an old squad mate that's in IA, like maybe check in on them, right? That's
Yeah,
something that your union reps can recognize. Like it's heavy for them, and I hats off to people that our reps, because they got to be there holding hands and alongside people going through their worst. And sometimes it's professional stuff. Oftentimes it's in tandem with personal stuff. And so, yeah, I think there is a recognition just to take a step, empathize, right? Same team, and
Yes,
just do your best. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, you were talking about this notion of keeping the drive to leave no stone unturned, and it made me think about also the speed component, right? Because you want to be timely, because this heavy cloud is hanging over somebody, and we've all heard stories, like horror stories, oftentimes when it's not in their bill of rights to have an IA finished by a certain timeline. What are your reflections on that?
Oh gosh, I talk about this a lot. In fact, we're getting ready. My partner James Tacchini and I, who my partner happens to be an active sergeant, San Francisco Police Department, who was part of the OIS rollout team. And so on day 2 of our classes, he teaches scene management and everything that happens from the time that you arrive to the scene of an OIS, when you pull the trigger, and then after. Me too, because I did that as a I was fortunate enough, and I know I'm the IA guy. However, um, and I'm deviating a little bit, but one of my assignments in LAPD, and we're fortunate because we're so big, is that union rep that you're talking about. We actually have an entire section of union reps. We
Hmm.
used to call it, what it's called officer representation section. And our primary duty was to roll out to critical incidents, OIS as being the most popular because it happens the most. And so when you arrive at scene of an OIS, post, pulling the trigger of the shooting officer, what ends up happening is the attorney is only going to represent and get paid to represent the shooting officer, whether it's one shooter or two, whatever the case may be. Guess who's left doing all the other substantially involved and everybody else who saw it, heard it, and all that? The rep. So we have to
Hmm.
prep, watch body worn video, and just go through this whole process that takes practically all night because OIS happened at night, early in
Yeah.
the morning. And so that was my job. So I must have rolled to hundreds of these where I gained that experience of, hey, once they pull the trigger, IAs come and investigate. This is what we need to do. And so that experience helped me a lot with the fact that there is legal, I should, the way I should word it is, or the way I should actually explain it is, when you're involved in a critical incident, there is a statute of limitations that needs to be met. And states, state by state, have different statutes. Some probably don't even have a statute. But as best practices, to your point, one of the things that's missing a lot from all these use of force experts that talk nationwide, I haven't heard much of it yet, is that you need to tap into, okay, you reviewed this particular critical incident. However, if your command staff 8, maybe 10 months later decides to say, I don't know, man, Eric and Marlon, man, when they took this guy down, before they actually broke leather, drawn exhibiting, whatever the case may be, that you know what, that didn't look like something that we teach. So you know what, let's go ahead and do an IA on them and cut a face sheet and investigate. Oh,
Mm.
whoa, 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 hold on a
Yeah.
second.
You looked at it
You
so
need
long ago, and
to
now,
do
right?
that after 8 months. And all these supervisors that were at scene, all these levels of review, including management, has seen all this, and no one has recognized that this might be possible alleged misconduct, which, by the way, it's based on performance. I mean, tactical applications, you and I both know, in real world, there is there's a lot of components that come into place that you need to take into consideration. And one of them is just, you know, real life situations. It doesn't look like you were taught. That's just the way it is. Nothing that you apply is like you learn in a sterile environment, or I should say in the learning environment in the academy. That's
Yeah.
just not the way it goes. And so there has been a discussion about, is performance deemed to be alleged misconduct? And some administrators say yes, some administrators say no. So to your point, one of the things that sticks out the most when it comes to teaching about all this is the fact that there is a timely issue when it comes to alleged misconduct, especially when it comes to critical incidents. Don't be that agency or that management that takes forever to get something done. The way I see it, the expectation should be, we used to have in internal affairs and LAPD a 5-month goal. So all these lieutenants and captains say, well, what's going on? We're getting ready. We have a 4-month alert. How's it going with your case? Well, if someone's claiming that you were discourteous, you were disrespectful, or you violated some policy and procedure, you know what? That shouldn't take you long to investigate. But when you start talking about critical incidents, just know that time is of the essence and you need to get it done as quickly as possible. Not because it's policy, but that's just best practices.
Yeah, that's fair. And so I think those are really good notes to keep in mind for those that are involved in some way, with their PDs in the process. What are your thoughts on having external review, right? And I feel like in light of maybe it's in tandem with transparency notes, right? But also, it's bandwidth. A lot of agencies might not be able to devote the resources because they're understaffed and all these things. And I can definitely perceive some pros and cons to having an external organization or private company running the IA. What are your thoughts on that?
Give Marlon a call. I'd be more than glad to do some for you.
There you go. There you go.
Those are the first ones.
So you do
My second,
contract work as well as training?
yes, I do. Yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. I do. I did an IA for a company that I work for now. I just did one, but I'm consulting on a couple of cases out of the state of Texas where she's an attorney and does a lot of gender discrimination, sexual harassment, hostile working environment. But she's like, hey, I don't know much about IA, and I've been seeing you on
Is it
LinkedIn.
Bridget?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
Bridget. Okay, she hasn't
yes.
aired on this. We've interviewed. Yeah.
Yes, Bridget
Okay.
got hold of me. We just reviewed 2 cases, and she might bring me on board to consult and maybe even retain me as an expert wit in one of her cases she's got forward. But that's the type of work I do. But to your question, without naming any agencies in the state
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Washington, is there two small agencies that are neighbors in the state of Washington? I would say yes, right? I mean, there's got to be two
Hmm.
little small agencies.
Yeah.
What I would do if I was king for a day is if it happened in police department A and you only have like 50 sworn officers, and police department B has like 80 officers or even less than 100, whatever the case
Yeah.
may be. And if it happens to be an internal, more than it is a public complaint, if it's an internal complaint of the following: a discrimination, sexual harassment, hostile working environment, or even improper remarks, any type of, like horsing around, joking around in a workplace environment, what I would do is if I was a chief in Department A, I would call the chief in Department B and say, hey, man, can you do me a solid? What's that, bro? Can you send me your best IA investigator to investigate this particular incident that happened here in my workplace,
Hmm.
in my station? That way it avoids biases, it avoids all kinds of conflict,
Yeah.
favoritism, nepotism, and the whole nine. Because here's the problem. In a small agent of 50, and you decided 50, there's got to be like what, maybe 5 lieutenants, if that? Well, you come up to one lieutenant, you don't know if that lieutenant knows the accused, or you don't know if that lieutenant knows the witness. It just gets very muddy. But I'm
Yeah.
a big fan of calling your neighbor agency and ask them to do you a solid and investigate that IA for you. Because if you keep it in house, there's that possibility that it just might not be as fair as you think it will be.
Yeah, that's such a good point for objectivity, right? We can think outside the box and hey, it's a mutual aid, right?
Yes,
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. We won't
solid.
have this divisiveness in the culture, and then it's just this outside party, and they can call things out, right? They'd be like, well, this doesn't really sound right or
Yeah,
look right, but here's the facts, chief, and take a look at what I
yeah,
found.
and in addition to that, let me just clarify: it doesn't necessarily have to be internal as well. It can be a critical incident of a major use of force.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
huge too. I mean, here in the state of California, you have duty to intercede. That's a Senate bill. That's an actual ordinance here in the
yeah,
state of California. And
yeah,
I'm sure in Washington you have something about intervening or interfering.
yeah.
Well, if you get into a major use of force in Department A, as my example, well, you want to start covering up, or what if someone does intervene?
Mm-hmm.
And next they're not, they don't think highly of that person. Who knows? What I'm saying is that call Department B and just have them investigate that particular critical incident. So I don't want you, the audience, to just say, "Oh, well, Marlon was just talking about internal stuff." It just depends on the circumstances. But like
Yeah,
you said,
yeah,
mutual aid is important. Hey, man, take care of me and I'll take care of you. That's very important. But we
yeah,
don't
for
do that.
sure.
We don't do that as a practice, especially when it comes to discipline. We just don't.
Yeah, yeah, and it's such a good note because, yeah, in Washington State, or at least in my region, if there's an OIS, you have like a detective on the regional team that's a liaison, but they're not taking part. They're not doing anything directly, right? It's every other agency is doing the lead investigation. They're the ones handling evidence, and then you literally have a liaison just to pass communication. So it keeps it clean, right? And so from the outside point of view, like that holds up way better. And then now, they're starting this outside independent office of investigations right through the state, which again, they're working that out. It's going to take time, but at least it builds that other layer where, hey, we have nothing to hide, so we'll just do that process the way it comes.
Yeah, and civilian oversight, I'm all for it, bro. I 100%. However, if you're going to outsource it to a private firm, my recommendation or my opinion is that just make sure you have someone that used to be a cop. I really
Sure.
honestly feel that. And if it's someone that has nothing to do, with you know, with the state of Washington in this particular example, it's even better because people know people.
Yeah.
You'll outsource it to a firm, and they're like, "Oh, well, dude, that's what's his name? Oh, yeah, well, he used to work here, and he knows so
Small
and so."
world, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a small world,
I
and you
could
know
see
each
that.
other. So that's just it's kind of hard to. You just gotta be as a chief. You have to think outside the box. You said it best. And
Yeah.
sometimes you got to do that, but we're not willing and able to try it. Now, if it does go outside or it goes to the neighboring agency, just know that your direct report is going to be to that chief of police,
Yeah,
who's going to
absolutely.
adjudicate it.
Makes sense. So, Marlon, we covered a lot of ground. What would you like to leave the listeners with? I mean, recognizing there's a wide audience, there's new
Yeah.
folks, senior folks, uh, you know, leaders officially, and line level cops. But what would you like to leave people with, and then let everybody know where they can find you and your podcast?
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. Look, the best advice that I have is just be flexible and know and understand that police work, what it was 25 years ago for me, is not what it is today. And when you go into this profession and you see and deal with tenured veteran officers, just stand tall, real, with I should say with courage to know that hey, that's not the way we used to do police work, because what you're being taught in the academy is completely different than what it was. And you know what? It has more transparency. It's got more clarity, and it's a tough job. If you decide to do this, you got to have your heart into it. Don't come into this profession just because it pays real good and you wanted to do another thing and you're like, oh my God, it's got great benefits. And this is, I'm going to make a lot of money. No, no one's telling you that you're going to be working graveyards. You're going to be working holidays. You're going to see the worst that God has to offer in this world. And you're going to have to cope with all the emotions that come into play. So, yeah, that's the best advice that I can give any young officer that's coming on. Just know that your plate is full, man. They're asking so much from you compared to what we went through 20 plus years ago. And for a supervisor, a sergeant, I can't even imagine doing the job of a sergeant now compared to what it was when I did it. I was promoted in 2007, so that was about 15, 16 years ago. And so, but you know what? It's afforded me so much success. You'll have the best time. You're going to meet the best people ever. And look at us. We met through social media, and now I feel like I can just jump in a car with you, and we're brothers for life, man. So I really
Amen.
appreciate having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. There's such a positive nature, I think, with this circle. Just about everyone, right? There's some negative people on social media, of course, but in this law enforcement first responder space, that's all about, hey, how can we elevate the profession? I've certainly felt that. I've certainly been grateful for that. And I love how you flipped it, right? Because we do see the worst of the human condition, but man, do you absolutely see the best too. And there's so many moments. I'm almost getting chills because I'm starting to think about some of the moments I'm most proud of that I was directly involved in. But then also as a sergeant, like the moments that I just got to watch, right? Or a
Yeah,
supervisor where I got to watch my guys like in the
Yes.
mix, in the element where like lives were saved. Like, and then even like the more innocuous things like, hey, this was a really rough situation, but that family and those kids, like they had those officers and those detectives responding. Like there was no one better, no better people to respond to that. So I love how you highlight that. And before I'd be remiss, but yeah, where can folks find your social and get in contact with you and your podcast?
Yeah. So the podcast is on YouTube, bro. It's exactly what it is. You type in Internal Affairs, a police podcast, and it should pop right up. And I got to tell you, man, I know you're coming on soon, but I got to tell you, just the way I describe it, it is rich in content. The guests come in with such good stories that we are all, including me, that are learning so much,
Hmm.
not just about the guests, but about this whole process. How you have a 30-year career veteran who, went through this awesome, illustrious career, and they had that one IA. And yeah, they had the retirement party, and everybody's like, oh my God, we're going to miss you. You were good, this and that. But now you're at home and you think to yourself, you know what? How much was I really validated? And how much affirmation do I have for what I did for those 30 years?
Hmm.
So a lot of these guests that come in, I learn from an emotional component that, you know what? I'm just so happy to have you here to tell us about this one thing that really bothered you, and sometimes there is accountability in your part. So go ahead and watch it. You have those shorts that are less than 30 seconds. Go around there, and then you want to watch a full episode, please do so. So that's one way to get a hold of me. And of course, LinkedIn. You know what? Marlon Marrache is where I am in LinkedIn. I drop a full episode a week. And last but not least, in Instagram, it's internal_affairs_podcast. And I'm just pumping reels and pumping out content, man, because
Yeah, you're active, man.
is so, so important to do. And having platforms like this, Eric, I can't thank you enough to inviting me to share my experience and a little bit of my story.
No, absolutely. Thanks so much, and we'll talk soon.
You got it, brother.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.